Welcome back to the Core Online Learning. This is the first in the series of power and conflict videos. We're going to look at every single poem and we are going to start looking at these poems in pairs. It's important that we look at these poems in pairs because that is how you are going to be writing your essays. You are always going to be comparing them. So it is best to look at how they link and how we can link them together in an essay. And this entire series should prepare you for any question that may come up in your exam. The two we're starting off with are Poppies and Kamikaze, and this is your comparison guide. So we'll go through everything that we need to compare these two poems. I have simplified the amount of quotations you will need just because I know it can be very difficult to memorize lots of quotations. So what we'll do is to simplify this entire thing is we will learn a few quotations that link from each poem. So not random quotations, not three random ones from the poem and three random ones from another poem, but specifically quotations that you will link together. So if Poppies comes up and you're going to compare it to Kamikaze, then you know that you know all the quotations that will link together to help you to do that. So let's start off by talking about their similarities. Their similarities are that they are from the perspective of the outsider. So the perspective of the outsider, by that I mean they are not from the perspective of a soldier. So very different to Exposure and Bayonet Charge. This is not the poet talking about what it was like to be a soldier during a conflict. This is the poet talking about what it's like to be someone outside looking in and trying to understand conflict. In Kamikaze, it's the daughter, and in Poppies, it's the mother. And both of them are trying to understand what went through the heads of the soldiers and how they came to end up this way. Now, it's important that we also remember that Poppies is not about World War I or II. It's set after World War I or II. But it is heavily implied that she has lost her son and that she feels a lot of empathy for the mothers during World War I and during World War II who also lost their sons. Now, that idea of empathy, of putting herself in their shoes, trying to understand what they went through because she feels like she finally understands them, she gets it because she's lost her son too. That idea of empathy runs through Poppies, but it also runs through Kamikaze because in Kamikaze she's trying to have empathy for her father. She remembers how tough it was for him. And when she's looking back, she's thinking about understanding him now she's an adult. And a lot of that empathy for others comes from their memories of the men that they lost. So obviously in Poppies, she's thinking about her son and remembering him. And in Kamikaze, she's thinking about her dad and she's remembering him. This is also reflected in the theme of family as well, and how conflict can tear families apart. In Poppies, obviously, she lost her son. In Kamikaze, she lost her father. And that links to their loss and their grief at the loss of their loved ones due to a conflict. And it doesn't mean that this loss was necessarily physical in Kamikaze, and we will go through that. So the first quotations that we're going to link together are about sacrifice. And we're going to look at gelled black thorns of your hair from Poppies. So everything from Poppies will be on the left. And then we will look at our Kamikaze quotations on the right. Our Kamikaze quotation is, "He must have wondered which had been the better way to die." Now, gelled black thorns of your hair is an important quotation because it is what we call a biblical allusion. So that is spelled A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. A biblical allusion is a biblical reference. So that's a reference to some form of biblical story. In this case, she's referring to Jesus, who, when he was sacrificed, wore a crown of thorns on his head. This strongly suggests that she saw her son as a sacrifice and implies that she has lost him to a conflict. She has sacrificed him, which is probably why she feels so much empathy with the mothers from World War I and World War II who lost their sons, who sacrificed them to war. We also have "He must have wondered which had been the better way to die" from Kamikaze. So here we have a quotation right at the end of the poem where she talks about her father's sacrifice not as a physical sacrifice. Her father did not physically die. He died this sort of emotional death. And when she says he must have wondered which had been the better way to die, she is wondering whether he sat there and thought about whether he should have just physically died and actually sacrificed himself, or whether he understands that now he has died emotionally and everyone around him pays no attention to him anymore. He's lost his family. He's seen as a coward. Now, obviously, then we link that to the context of kamikaze pilots and that they were forced to sacrifice themselves, and a lot of them didn't really have a choice. And if they did come back, they were seen as cowards. So when she says he must have wondered which had been the better way to die, she's wondering if he sits there contemplating whether he should have done it or not, and whether he spent the rest of his life wondering that. So that's quite a sad idea there. And it really shows that even though she didn't lose her father, he was sacrificed in another way. So in that sense, both of them do focus on the idea of sacrifice and the idea that they lost people who were close to them and they sacrificed them. So then we move on to the perspective of the outsider. So this moment is really them trying to understand the other person and trying to understand what it must have been like to go to war or to make that decision to go to war. So in Poppies, we have the phrase, "You were away intoxicated." Now, this is a metaphor. Intoxication means to be drunk. Now, he is not actually intoxicated. What she's talking about here is the fact that he was sort of not thinking straight, perhaps. He was intoxicated by life and by the promise of adventure. So perhaps this could be a reference to him going into the military, and he is sort of drunk with this idea that he's going to be a hero, or that there's a lot to do in the world that he's going to go out and do. So when she says this, she's trying to understand sort of why he did what he did. Similarly, we have another metaphor, so we can compare how the writers use these two metaphors, in Kamikaze, where she says, "A shaven head full of powerful incantations." Now, obviously, his head is not full of powerful incantations literally, so that's what makes it a metaphor. But incantation is like a spell, so she's suggesting that her father was under some form of spell. Now, what we see across these two quotations is that both of them are suggesting that their family member was not really thinking clearly when they went to war. And perhaps that links to soldiers who are promised the glory of war, especially in Kamikaze. So we know that during World War II, Japanese kamikaze pilots were told that they would get all the glory and they would go down in history being a kamikaze pilot. So those are the spells that he was under, and we obviously call those propaganda. So this metaphor shows that he was under the spell of propaganda and that he believed that he was going to do something glorious and brave and noble. So in both, they are trying to understand why the men in their lives have done what they have done. And we move back on to understanding. So this is where they do try to understand them and to understand their perspective. And it kind of links to the last point. So in Poppies, she says the world overflowing like a treasure chest. And because we have that word like, it becomes a simile. By this, it seems possible that she means that he was excited. So the world was overflowing like a treasure chest when he leaves her, when he goes out into the world. And what that could represent, what that could symbolise, is opportunity. And he sees a whole world of opportunity out there when he leaves his mother and he leaves the safety of his home. Now, obviously, his mother wants to protect him, and that's why she keeps flashing back to memories of him as a small child, when she could be a mother to him and protect him. But she's lost him now, and she knows that he's gone out there because of this promise of excitement. and saying it was like a treasure chest, again showing that the world was shiny and new, and that's what he's gone out to find. In Kamikaze, we have some really strong, powerful imagery here. Little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea. So we have 3 adjectives in a row there: green, blue, translucent. And this is her thinking about why her father wanted to live. So perhaps why her father came back. And so she's trying to understand why her father came back and abandoned his ideas of bravery and nobility and the belief of the Kamikazes. So she says, little fishing boats strung out like bunting. Now again, we've got another simile here because of that word like. And bunting is used as a decoration in a celebration. So again, all of these phrases are very, very positive. And it could be suggested that she's talking about how he is watching the world below him from this plane and he's reminded of all the beauty in it. So whilst in Poppies, she is trying to understand why he went, in Kamikaze, she's trying to understand why he came back. And that's where this idea of understanding comes from. We then have pain and how they both represent pain. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt. So our verbs there, flattened and rolled, are quite interesting verbs where she's talking about how she feels as though she cannot speak anymore. All the words that she wants to say to her son as he's leaving are flattened down. And when she says turned into felt, we have that metaphor there of them being turned into a fabric. Now, the reason that she compares them to felt is because to make felt, you crush fabric. So it's this idea of all of her words being crushed because of the pain that she's in, saying goodbye to her son and letting him go wherever he's going. So again, it is heavily suggested that he's gone off to the military, or she's lost him in some form of conflict. There have been a number of conflicts since World War I and II, and she could have lost him in one of those. So when she uses this metaphor, she's really talking about the pain of a mother who has to let go of her son as he goes out into the world. In Kamikaze, we have the phrase, "This was no longer the father we loved." Now, that's interesting because it shows how she has understood that she played a part in her father's emotional death there, that she learnt not to acknowledge her father in the way she had before. So this symbolises her letting go of her father when she was a child because that's what she was told to do. So both of these show their pain and their loss and their grief, because although she didn't physically lose her father in Kamikaze, she did emotionally lose him. So those link to the main